This is a video about human adulthood and human childhood and what does it have to do with awakening and enlightenment. Good afternoon, this is Chris from Wake Up, and today I want to talk with you about human adulthood. One of the reasons why this channel exists is because I perceive a lot of confusion about terminology. What is what? What is enlightenment? What is awakening? And what is human adulthood? And what is love and peace and bliss? Is this all the same? Because it's not, but many people talk about it as if there would be one state you could achieve and then it's all hunky-dory. One aim, one goal, and then you don't have to do anything anymore because everything is beautiful. There's an important distinction that is very well made by Jed McKenna, the distinction between human adulthood and enlightenment. Basically, according to Jed McKenna, awakening and human adulthood is very similar, but enlightenment is completely different. It's not what most people expect. We have been brainwashed for centuries by religions and recently in the last decades by New Age spiritual teachers that awakening and enlightenment is the same and that it is great. You get all kinds of superpowers and you're totally blissed out and all problems are gone. The last thing is kind of true. Problems are gone when you're enlightened, but everything is gone when you're enlightened. Well, awake or human adulthood just means it's a natural state. It's the usual state you should be in as an adult, but most people are not. As Gurdjieff and Freud and all kinds of spiritual teachers, philosophers and psychologists have pointed out already, most people are stuck in childhood. Not even juvenile adolescence kind of teenager thing, but before 4, 6, 8, 10 years old actually. They're running around in adult bodies, but they're actually children. And all the atrocities, all the stupidity, all the evil you see in this world is because people are playing sandbox games, no matter how old they are. And in the recent months, during the sea crisis, many of you have probably observed that people are running around like frightened children. This is because they are frightened children inside. Ramesh Balkasar said, if you have the choice between enlightenment and $1 million, take the $1 million. Because if you get the $1 million, there will be somebody there to enjoy the $1 million. If you get enlightenment, there's no one there to enjoy enlightenment. This is what I said last time about wanting the cake and wanting to eat it too. And on top of that, want a specific kind of cake you've been told about. If you want to enjoy a higher state of consciousness, you're after awakening and human adulthood, because enlightenment is to give everything up. You leave the dream state and therefore there's also nothing to enjoy anymore. There are a few very good lines with a lot of very good lines, but a few that I want to read to you in Jed McKenna's Spiritual Warfare, and he puts it in such a perfect way that I cannot formulate it better, so I'll read it to you. Human childhood is the ego-bound state. It is in human children a healthy and natural state. In human adults, however, it's a hideous affliction. The only way such an affliction could go undetected and unremedied is if everyone were equally afflicted, which is exactly the case. No problem is recognized and no alternative is known, so no solution is sought and no hope for change exists. We live our entire lives under false pretenses. In a case of mistaken identity, we subscribe fully and without reservation to our false selfhood, mistaking these two-dimensional roles we play for who and what we really are. In fact, we should be discarding these juvenile disguises in our early teens and embarking on life journeys of such superiority that by contrast, the ego behind life is no life at all. Think of a grasshopper caught in a spider's web, injected with a non-lethal poison, and then cocooned in layer upon layer of silk thread, kept alive for freshness but tightly bound to prevent threshing or escape. It is still alive but bears no resemblance to its authentic grasshopper self. That state of immobilized, narcotized stupor fairly represents the state of the chronic human child, misapprehended worldwide as a normally developed adult, and the spider fairly represents Maya. Most human beings cease to develop at around the age of 10 or 12. The average 70-year-old is often a 10-year-old with 60 years time in grade. Our societies are of, by, and for human children, which explains the self-perpetuating nature of this ghoulish melody, as well as most of the silliness we see in the world. The human child, who has spent years of the same developmental stage, understands growth as a process of solidification, of slow hardening into a rigid mass. In our world of human children, this mortification of the spirit is considered normal, healthy, and respectable. If we gauge societies in light of the developmental maturity of their citizens, we see very little difference even between extremes. One society may be, on average, slightly further along than another, but the reality is that no society has advantages beyond the stage where girls play dress-up and boys torture frogs. If we lived in a society conducive to healthy, normal development, everyone would outgrow childhood in the personality structure. At the same time, we outgrow it in the physical structure. We are trapped in a state of self-aware simian consciousness. That is the human condition. Any of the negative things we might say about people in general, that we're greedy, corrupt, apathetic, stupid, hateful, violent, etc., are not symptoms of the human animal or the self-aware being, but of human childhood. Human childhood, thou, is itself just a symptom of the one core disease from which all others radiate: fear. Fear is the natural and certain state of one who lives with eyes closed. Ignorance is the condition of thinking one's closed eyes are open and that the world of one's imagining is the world as it exists. For a person to transition into human adulthood at an appropriate developmental age would require an actual rite of passage, rather than a merely symbolic ceremony as it is sometimes observed, but it would take much more than that. It would take a society of human adults in which to occur. For a person to transition into human adulthood at an inappropriate developmental age, however, can and does occur. That's the good news. The individual who wants to achieve change and growth in his own life, who wants to move beyond the state of developmental retardation imposed by a developmentally retarded society, can probably do so. There's no saying what's possible for whom, but I feel pretty confident in saying that anyone who can understand their captivity and desire their freedom would find it possible to bring about a dramatic change in their condition. This is where the sincere seeker must make the most rigorous and concentrated effort. If we don't get this, we don't get anything. It's not enough to kind of get it. We have to grok it, live it and breathe it, make it our own personal religion and become fanatic about it. We must learn to see the difference between a human adult and a human child as easily and unmistakably as we see the difference between a 60-year-old and a 6-year-old. This may sound a little weird, but your ego is smarter than you, way smarter. And if you don't recognize that and respect it, you stand very little chance against it. I've seen many very insightful books by very brainy men and women who were experts on the subject of ego transcendence, but who, I could easily tell, had not transcended their own egos. The spiritual religious marketplace, which should be dedicated entirely to ministering to this all-important developmental advent, is in fact arrayed almost entirely against it. Ego doesn't need to be killed because it was never really alive. You don't have to destroy your false self because it's not real, which is really the whole point. It's just a character we play, and what needs to be killed is that part of us that identifies with the character. Once that's done, really done, and it can take years, then you can wear the costume and play the character as it suits you. Now in the character, but not of the character. Now the difference between adulthood and enlightenment is that the former is awakening within the dream state and the latter is awakening from it. Shallow early age adulthood is often misunderstood for and sold as spiritual enlightenment, but it's not. It's just the first real glimpse of it, of life. The death and rebirth transition from womb to world. The most important distinction to be made between these two states is that human adulthood makes sense and enlightenment doesn't. The main benefit most spiritually inclined people can derive from having a clear understanding of what it really means to be truth realized is not so they can achieve it, but so they can dispense with it and reset their spiritual sights on something worthier than enlightenment, which is literally the biggest nothing of all time. Human adulthood is what everyone really wants, not truth or enlightenment. Human adulthood is where you find all the good stuff and a lot less of the bad stuff. You have to grow into it, of course, continue to develop and mature, learn, expand, but that's where all the perks are. Profound and abiding contentment, the ability to manifest desires and shape events, the ability to do less and accomplish more, find your true calling, connect with your higher self, never stub another toe, and so on. Human adulthood is what everyone, spiritually or not, religious or not, atheist or not, should be setting their sights on. This is what I've come to understand in my years of teaching and writing. If I were to give advice, I would recommend adulthood to everyone and enlightenment to no one. Human adulthood is life positive, while enlightenment is life negative. Human adulthood is the real prize. Spiritual enlightenment is pointless and meaningless and should only be sought by those who have absolutely no choice in the matter. So this is really extremely well put. What most people think they want or even have already achieved or gotten to is human adulthood. And that's fine. It's great. That's actually our natural states, that where we should be. We should be free from our childhood fears and hopes and dreams and fairy tale illusions. Yeah, if at an early age you wanted to become a veterinary or a fireman or a deep sea diver or a pirate or whatever, a princess maybe, or a knight or a magician, this is all fine, but as an adult you should have a little bit of a more realistic attitude. You still can become a magician, of course, or a princess or a fireman, but for specific reasons, not just because it strikes your fancy. Or just because your mother just read Tolkien to you, or Peter Pan, or Grimm's fairy tales. You need to take responsibility for yourself and not blame everything on your parents or on stupid politicians. And you need to see the world for what it is, and that is called human adulthood. And within that human adulthood, there are certain stages and phases where certain things are more important than others. For example, love or universal love or bliss, CDs, manifesting, and so on. All nice and good, but it's not enlightenment. And every single person who has ever really had enlightenment happen to him or her says that it is not a state that is somehow desirable. It's not a fairy tale. It's not being a prince or a princess. It's not being a magician or something. It's a state of deep neutrality and of disillusionment. But it's not that everything is more fun now. It's not the same thing, only better. It's something completely different. That is why UG says there is no such a thing as enlightenment. Because there is no such a thing as enlightenment as is being sold on the spiritual marketplace. A child cannot see the difference between a Gandalf or a Professor Dumbledore-like magician and a stage magician. And everything that we cannot explain logically, that our mind cannot fathom how it's being done, is judged as being magic. So if we see someone who seems to be enlightened, we automatically think, that's a Gandalf state. Someone who exudes wisdom and peace and tranquility. But we can never reach a Gandalf state, because Gandalf wasn't even a human being in the book. He was a demigod. He was a spirit of nature sent by the gods to help humans. He was a supernatural being. And we will never be that. First we have to become human beings, human adults, and then let's see about the rest. And that's also the thing with the effort. So many spiritual teachers talk about effort. Yes, to become a human adult, that's where you need effort. But afterwards, once you're a human adult, it's not about effort anymore. It's about surrender. But it's not something you have to do. Yeah, it's not the necessary next logical step. It's not the promotion. Yeah, it's not the next wage limit or graduation. Yeah, like you graduate from master degree to PhD. It's not that you necessarily graduate from awakening to enlightenment. No one has to be enlightened, and there are no perks in there, because you have to give up everything. The good news about the whole thing is, once you graduate to human adulthood, you don't see the world as an evil place anymore, because you realize that everyone is running around like children because they are really children. They're not evil. They're just childhood bullies, guarding their cars or puppets or sandcastles. That's why there's also never enough. For some people there's never enough. They're billionaires and they want to have even more billions, no matter what it takes and how many people die because of it. Because it's a game. It's a children's game where imaginary people die. And the driving factor of this game is the electricity that comes to life between joy and fear. Positive thrills and negative thrills. That is what makes games interesting. Once you are enlightened, which is another thing entirely, has nothing to do with human adulthood. Although it might be more likely once you are humanly adult. But once you're there, there's no thrill anymore. There's no polarity anymore between joy and fear. There's no fear anymore. So there's no enjoying games anymore. You might feel an instinctive thrill if you jump out of an airplane with a parachute. But that's it. That's your bodysuit feeling the thrill. Okay, that's just one thing I really wanted to make clear again and again. There's a difference between awakening and enlightenment. And I hope it's clearer to you now. And also that enlightenment is not really something that can be wanted or desired, because it's a sort of suicide. The thing that you are cannot want it, because it means the end of the thing that you think you are. It's not a state of bliss, it's a state of void. Bliss is one of the states within human adulthood, within awakening. It's really nice, but it's not the ultimate truth. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, subscribing, joining me on Patreon, and sharing the videos with your friends. And see you soon.